Hi, and welcome back to Skrælige. This is Chapter 13. We left off in June of 1812 when the United States declared war against the United Kingdom and its dependencies, which included Skrælige. At first, Skrælige avoided the impact of the war. The New England states were staunchly against it, and Britain wasn't even forcing in a blockade on New England at that point, which was kind of a backhanded way to help exploit internal tensions. Most of the actual warfare was focused on Upper Canada, modern-day Ontario, and that winter that expanded into the American Northwest. That's the Old Northwest, so really the kind of general area around Ohio, so west of the Appalachians. The garrison of British troops in Fort Charles wasn't even at full strength, and many of them were stationed in Upper Canada, where the British were a lot more vulnerable. This changed, though, in the middle of the night on the 9th of August, 1813. American-aligned saboteurs lit fire to the Thing and the Central Market in Skrælingborough in order to stage a distraction and allow a small American force to land to the west. Unusually dry weather meant that this distraction became a full-blown inferno. By the time the fire was brought fully under control the next day, most of Skrælingborough within the walls, which themselves were badly damaged, was turned to rubble. During all this commotion, the Americans were able to surround and conquer New Hope and force the surrender of Fort Charles. Many patriots who were descended from the New Englanders were sympathetic to the US, which allowed the invasion force to quickly secure Havant and Abenakibara upstream and exert control over the lower Sigwon Valley. So this is actually my first time really using natural disasters in city skylines. Somehow I've gone this long without, I think I messed around with one or two disasters, but this is the first time I've actually set fire to my own work. Which, it's a little bit of a tough step when you've worked on it for so long. But yeah, so basically I kind of just set a fire, saw what it was going to do. I did end up going back and making some adjustments. So there's a couple of major landmarks that I didn't want to go, but they did actually burn down when I set the fire in game. The behind the scenes is I saved the game, but then I went back to the old save and just manually demolished what I wanted to be demolished, which was most of it. And then the walls don't actually burn down in-game, networks don't get destroyed by fire, so I had to do that one manually. So now there's not much left. Planning on keeping at least some remnants, but this is at least gonna unblock some road widening. Yeah, so you just kind of see the fire spreading. There's a few random parts that the fire just decides to leave alone, which is kind of how fires work normally, but it's just funny how there's some parts that get skipped over. After the center of Skrælingborough burned down, there were suddenly over 1,000 people made homeless. The American occupation force organized an effort to build temporary housing in the outer districts, and this housing would serve as shelter until the rubble of the center of the city could be cleaned up and allow some proper rebuilding. The end result was basically a row of shacks. These were colloquially known as either am shacks or patriot estates, depending on how much sarcasm or euphemism you wanted. While the occupation of the lower Sigwon Valley was swift, this wasn't really the case in the upper valley or some of the outer coastal areas. The upper Sigwon Valley was filled with loyalists and their descendants, and were essentially faced with a rerun of the Revolutionary War from 3 decades ago. They didn't have the strength to fight off the American invasion, but there were sporadic resistance efforts, and it made administration a major headache. The coastal and inland areas, meanwhile, weren't outright opposed to occupation in the same way, but they continued to engage in smuggling throughout New England and the maritime Canadian region, and the remoteness of these settlements from the center of Skrælige meant that American efforts to stop this were completely futile, especially with the low number of troops they had available. So it turns out the Amshacks were yet another way where I could reuse the Skrælige colonial houses. So these are the lowest level ones, and just made huge rows of them. It's the sort of thing where it's meant to be temporary housing. There's definitely going to be some stragglers that stick around. I think the closest real-world example I can think of is San Francisco in 1906, when they built up a bunch of housing, very temporary shacks to house people that were displaced. And I think a few of them still survive till today, even selling for more than $1 million because, well, it's San Francisco and it's insane. Trying to figure out the detailing for the backyards was tricky because there's trying to add a lot of clutter, but there's a lot of open space, so I'm not 100% happy with it. A lot of it will be redeveloped in a few years anyway, so don't feel too bad. And then the thing that looks a little bit odd here is now I'm adding these rubble piles. So when I do the before-after shot, you'll suddenly see these big piles come up. My thinking is that they're starting to at least pile up all the rubble, but it does look like there's rubble coming out of nowhere after the fire, so just things that look a little bit odd, but kind of make it look more like a disaster zone that's being rebuilt. The balance of power changed in 1814. Emperor Napoleon of France had been forced to abdicate, bringing a truce that allowed the UK to dedicate more forces to North America. The British blockade was now able to expand northwards and cover all of New England, as well as American-occupied Skrælige. On the 11th of July, efforts to reoccupy Maine began when the Royal Navy took Moose Island. In September, they led the Penobscot expedition to retake Penobscot Bay and re-establish New Ireland, and by October, Skrælige was surrounded. After taking heavy losses at sea, the American land forces surrendered on the 21st of October, 1814. So once the British were back in control, a rebuilding of Skrælingborough could really ramp up. Parts of the grid within the old walls were reconfigured, and some of the main roads were widened and paved where possible. There wasn't any appetite for further demolition though, so in areas where the streets were more constrained, they would stay that way. Reconstruction would take several years, if not a decade or two, but new construction initially focused around King Street in order to help merchants and increase commercial activity. Because of course they had to focus on making the capitalists better off. Another immediate action was the foundation of the Skrælige Metropolitan Fire Department in 1814. Burning of Skrælingborough showed that the disorganized volunteer system of firefighting that was used previously was inadequate for fighting major fires, and the first municipal fire station was built in the middle of Skrælingborough, right around where the fire started. Other stations would be built soon thereafter, first in other sections of the city and then in further out towns. The system of professional government-run fire departments would later spread throughout all of Skrælige, but the Metropolitan Fire Department would remain the biggest department in Skrælige through today. And that covers this chapter. I wanted to try to do something a little more focused for this episode, get it to not be like 40 or 50 minutes or however long chapter 12 was. This was a case where originally I thought, oh, I can do 1812 to 1850. Quickly realized that was way too big, so I planned for 1812 to 1836. And then I kind of thought, I want to at least put something big in for the War of 1812. So that ended up becoming its own episode to just cover basically 3 or 4 years. So one of the big things you'll see here is the wider and narrower cobblestone roads. This was a case where I wanted to add more lanes and start making some avenues. They're not like quite Parisian levels, but have some avenues that are going to allow more traffic, and the idea being, you're opening up the old city. What I ended up doing, and I'm not sure if this is going to be something that I release, because the version I have right now is kind of a little bit hacked together, but I took the cobblestone roads made by Doff and took out the model using mod tools and modified that slightly, because you can scale it in-game, but it ends up looking a little bit weird. There's a few very minor details, like just the Z levels, that don't quite line up if you just scale it that way. So modified the model and then re-imported that, and so now we have some narrow alleyways that are 1 tile wide, and the avenues are 3 tiles wide, so they can handle 2 lanes of traffic, both directions, plus parking, which doesn't really make sense in 1815 context, but it will later. A lot of this is just future-proofing. And then a lot of what you'll see here is me using Move It to kind of move the roads around, and then midway realizing, the node controller actually makes offsetting the roads really easy in a way that actually makes this look exactly how I wanted it to. So you see me doing some work and then kind of redoing it there. Next, for rebuilding, I was kind of figuring out the best architecture here is a little bit weird, because there's a lot of good buildings from the late 1800s that really fit in for New York and Boston, and that architecture would be kind of perfect, but it still feels a little bit early. The European buildings, I'm kind of on the fence about some of them. So I kind of try to pick the European buildings that look like they could still kind of fit in to at least northeastern North America. So it's going to be kind of a blend of architectural styles here. But a lot of this is just me cycling through all the assets I have and just taking stock of which ones fit yet and which ones still look a little bit off. And then I end up making this big marketplace here. A lot of the places where there's those stalls just out in the middle of nowhere are going to become commercial buildings and markets later, but for now this is the first one that's getting built immediately at the start. There's going to be a lot more rebuilding to come in the next episode for all the other blocks, but I at least wanted to get something started. So I didn't think it made sense for everything to be magically rebuilt in a year or two, but I don't think it'll take that much longer, so this kind of is a snapshot of at least a few blocks getting rebuilt. Also use some triple deckers, pretty common type of apartment from the Boston area, and they fit in very nicely here. The Thing building also gets an extension. It's using the like that New England Resorts pack. Some of those buildings fit in very well here. Then at the end, to take care of all the casualties from the fire, the cemetery expands quite a bit, and it's already starting to get pretty close to full. So I hope you enjoyed this one. Be moving on. The next one will be 1815 to 36. Then there's a transportation special planned, and we'll keep on moving from there. So yeah, thanks for watching. Have a good one.